Hey guys, what's up? It's Zyflin here, and today we're going to be learning how to play Chroma and or Chroma Prime in Warframe. Chroma isn't necessarily a really hard frame to play. You just have to press your 2, and then you press your 3, and then you take a bunch of damage to your shields and your health, and then you get an increase to both your armor and your overall damage output. So it's not like he is an insanely difficult frame to play. It's just there are a few things that you can do to kind of optimize your gameplay with Chroma. Like, for example, using a decaying dragon key to reduce your maximum shields so that way you can get to your damage buff faster, or using a self damage weapon to self damage yourself to get that bonus, because there is a lot of like rumors floating around that like you can no longer self damage with Chroma for whatever reason. That seems to be a common misconception in Twitch chat, but you can definitely still do that, right? So we're just going to go over like different ways to build Chroma and all that jazz. So mainly whenever you're looking at a Chroma build, you don't have to copy and paste mine, right? Like my Chroma build will be entirely different to what suits your playstyle. Some people like to have more duration, some people like to have more efficiency, some people like to completely neglect range, which, I mean, you can definitely build that way, and there is a multitude of ways to build Chroma, like I said, and it's down to your personal playstyle. There's also going to be a multitude of arcanes that you can use to further buff up your total amount of DPS that you're dealing. So say, for example, you're using Chroma in an Eidolon hunt, you may want to use Arcane Momentum to make it so you can build your combo faster with your sniper, because that's how snipers work. The more you shoot the enemy, then the more combo you're going to build up and the more damage you're going to output whenever they finally become vulnerable to your damage in the case of Eidolons, right? So that being said, you mainly want to be focusing on power strength, getting that as high as possible, because the higher you get your power strength, then the higher your bonuses or your buffs are going to be, right? So whenever you think about, let's say, for example, Chroma's damage buff, right? His damage buff basically works like a Serration or a Hornet Strike or whatever, right? So that gives you the ability or the opportunity to mod your weapons a little bit differently whenever you're taking them into a specific scenario, right? Which is why you'll see a lot of Chroma players in Eidolon hunts actually use a build that looks a little bit more like this, where they don't have Serration equipped on their Lanka or their Rubico or whatever, and they instead opt for Prime Cryo Rounds. Now, the reason that they do this is because this is going to give you a further elemental damage bonus, right? So think of Eidolons like having the CM armor that a Bombard has, which is alloy armor, right? Alloy armor takes bonus damage from radiation and cold. So you take 75% extra damage from the radiation and then the 25% bonus damage from the cold. So whenever you're shooting an Eidolon with radiation and cold damage, then you're getting effectively a 100% damage buff, right? So because your Chroma buff, his third ability, whenever you do the self-damage to your health, is actually acting as a Serration. So the higher your power strength is going to be, the higher that Serration is going to be. You can completely neglect using Serration on this build and then go ahead and throw on Prime Cryo Rounds to get that further damage bonus, right? So this wouldn't be the exact build that I would recommend to, anyone looking to get into Eidolons, right? If I were recommending a build for players to get into Eidolons, I would change up my rhythm for Val Acceleration, and then I'd remove Prime Cryo Rounds for Serration, and then that would be the build that I would recommend, like the Lanka build, for newer players getting into Eidolon hunts. Like, same for the Rubico as well. It would be more or less the exact same, except Foul Acceleration would be something different, maybe Prime Fast Hands or another element or whatever, just so then they have a little bit higher of a DPS increase, right? So it's really down to the player at that point what they want to throw on, because you have that one extra slot and it's down to you. However, whenever we go back and we take a look at our Chroma Prime and we look at the buffs we have, so that Serration that I was talking about, the way that we remove that from our Lanka or our Rubico or whatever, 943% Serration is effectively what you have whenever you get that full self-damage buff as Chroma on your Vex armor. Now remember, that is Chroma's damage buff whenever you take damage to health. So you actually have to be damaging your health in some way, shape, or form to be getting this 943% damage increase, right? So we would use the likes of the Haiku Prime with concealed explosives or any other throwing weapon that you have in your secondaries talons, sancticastanas. You can even use the glaives because you can make the glaives explode. Sometimes they kill you if you don't have it built right, and like I don't have a specific build to show you guys whenever it comes to using a glaive to self-damage, but some Eidolon speedrunners would use a glaive to just kind of throw it and then get that self-damage buff. The reason I don't like them is because they knock you over, and because I play with random players a lot, random players on stream, etc. I like being able to kind of control how much damage I'm taking and kind of what's going on in case I have to do your role for somebody else, you know, like going and getting the lures or whatever the case may be. So that's why I prefer these Haiku Prime or throwing weapons with concealed explosives either way for my self-damage. So it's really down to you what you use. Like I said, talons, sancticastanas, glaives, etc. You can use all of those to self-damage yourself and get that fury buff. So on top of that, you can also use this Decaying Dragon Key to reduce your maximum shield so you get that damage buff a lot faster. Now, because you're running the Decaying Dragon Key, you're kind of sacrificing that armor buff, and depending on what you're doing, you may want that armor buff. So if you were doing a survival sortie or just like a survival mission, defense mission, or whatever in general, then you would want to have, you know, those higher shields so you can get that armor buff. Because remember, you can recast Vex armor to keep your buff up. So, I mean, having that bonus armor, being able to recast it to keep that up or extend the duration is actually really, really beneficial, right? So there's no reason to use the Decaying Dragon Key in that circumstance, but if you were speedrunning Eidolons or whatever, then you would definitely want to have a Decaying Dragon Key just so you can get that damage buff faster, because that's what you're focusing on really, okay? So, with all that being said, let's go ahead and, I guess, jump into a mission, and I'll show you guys how I like to use it. I'm going to go ahead and use the Rubico Prime just because I don't feel like using the Lenka, but you'll see it with my Lenka build. Well, you know what, I'll use the Lenka with the Prime Cryo rounds just to kind of demonstrate how deadly it can be even without Serration, right? So let's do that instead. Of course, I do have a Riven on. I guess I will remove the Riven for you guys, and we'll use Val Acceleration, just so you can see that my damage numbers here are rather low. So we have 3,122 radiation, and then 1,840. So that's around 5,000, 6,000 damage, right? Not exactly doing correct math right there, but give or take around that number, right? So, with all that being said, let's just go ahead and jump into a, what's it called? A thingy-mablobber, a defense mission, and you'll see the damage output. So I guess we'll do one of the higher level defenses. So there we go, in the void. So really all it's about is getting that damage buff off and then keeping it up, and being like a little bit more lazy. You'll want to use a heavier duration build. I like going for a more efficient build because I never know what I'm going to get in the Eidolon hunt, right? Like I don't know if I'm going to have to recast or if I'm going to, you know, have to jump around and wait for players. So because you've got so much power strength on your Chroma, then you don't have a lot of efficiency. So I don't want to waste as many pads. So that's why I opt a little bit more for an efficient Chroma versus a heavy duration Chroma, right? So first thing we do, we can turn on our 2 because the 2 is a nice buff as well. So depending on Chroma's elemental alignment, an offensive area of effect is created. Chroma and its nearby allies are imbued with defensive energy. So depending on what you have as your energy color, it's going to give you a different, buff on your elemental ward. So I like using ice because that reflects damage back at enemies. I'm not too sure what the fire, toxin, and electric ones do off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure the fire one has something to do with health, but the other two I just don't know right now. But I always have stuck to the ice one, and I've never swapped off for whatever reason. It's just the one that I always use. So elemental ward, there's no reason not to have it up apart from the fact that you have to keep on recasting it. And then Vex armor, again, the idea is to have this thing up for as long as possible, having that buff as high as it can be for as long as possible, and then constantly recasting it. So take a look at these energy numbers as well. So you have 78 on the elemental ward, which may be a reason that you don't want to cast that, and then 116 on Vex armor. So that's a reason to bring energy pads, Xeneric, Eevee Trinity, whatever. So yeah, just keep all of that stuff in mind. So hit your 2, hit your 3. You'll see that you have pretty decent duration on there. Get out your Haiku or whatever you're using to self-damage yourself, and then get your health and energy back some way by using pads. And you'll see that we still one-shot and we're still dealing pretty high numbers. So Another way to maximize your damage if you're playing Chroma in Eidolon hunts, be completely scoped in, and of course, okay, that was a pretty huge number right there, and of course, you know, make use of that scope bonus, right? So keeping that combo up, you can see it, the shot combo at the bottom, that's why you want to have Arcane Momentum, so you can build that as high as possible to kind of guarantee a one hit on the Eidolon as soon as his immunity stage goes down, right? So that is basically all that you're paying attention to, aiming for the weak spots on enemies, and all that jazz. So you see, I didn't recast my Vex armor, so the buff is gone. So I have to go ahead and self-damage myself. You can't recast Elemental Ward, which kind of sucks. I wish you could just recast that, but or refresh the duration on it. But you can see down there in the bottom right, we're at 34 seconds. We recast up to 44, and we keep our buff. So that's what you're aiming to do whenever you're playing Chroma in the likes of an Eidolon hunt, or just in general in a survival mission or whatnot. So yeah, just keep all of that in mind. So he's a really damaging frame, and you can definitely kill enemies extremely fast with him, like really high level enemies. You could take this into like Elephantis sortie. You can bring something with a crazy Riven on it. Like, keep in mind, I unequip my Riven on this. We put Val Acceleration on here, so then we can, you know, effectively get more DPS, because we're not always focusing on the highest damage number, right? We're focusing on how fast we can kill the enemies. So being able to charge up your Lanka a lot faster, because you already have an Insane buff on Chroma, it's totally fine to lose 15% damage, right? 110% fine. But yeah, you get the point. It's all about keeping your buff up, paying attention to that timer. It's actually something that I wish that they would allow us to move to the center of the screen below my crosshair. Like, if I could move that little timer down the bottom right for my abilities, if I could have that just directly below my crosshair in some capacity, that would make playing Chroma or Trinity or any frame where I have to, like, pay attention to my my cooldowns, that would make playing them so much more fun and so much more, I guess, rewarding, because, like, you know, I would be playing them more effectively, right? So that's just kind of my mindset towards that. But of course, Chroma isn't the best defense frame in the world. You don't really have any CC, and notice how I haven't really spoke about the 1 or the 4. That's because you don't want to use them, because they suck. The 1 is just, you stand in front of enemies. Okay, that wasn't me that did that. That was my cat. My cat killed him. But you stand and you breathe ice or whatever you have equipped as your elemental, and then your 4 is you take off your little dragon pelt, right? Let's go get my energy back. And then it floats around, and you lose armor, you move faster, and the bad guys do a big old die to the dragon. But again, it's not the best, like, AoE damage dealing ability in the world, and it drains your energy pretty fast, especially if you're running a Vex armor build. So 9 times out of 10, not worth it to use unless you're playing like really low level content, right? So all that being said, Chroma is one of those frames that people kind of write off because of how hard it is to keep up his buff, unless you're doing the likes of an Eidolon hunt, right? So the reason that people don't use the likes of like a Mirage in an Eidolon hunt is because it's dark, it's nighttime during an Eidolon hunt, so you can't get that daytime buff on Mirage, because Mirage is just one of those crazy frames whenever it comes to how much damage she can buff up, right? Because for some reason her buff is multiplicative compared to Chroma, which again acts like Suretion rather than being its own crazy thing that it used to be, right? Because like, if Chroma stayed the way he was prior to him being changed to what he is now, then doing Eidolon hunts would be so much easier, right? But I don't know. It has me a little bit worried about how they're going to handle the orbs, because if there's a damage phase on the orbs, I don't know. They're either going to use Mirage or Chroma. Like, well, probably Mirage, saying it's daytime, unless the orbs are in areas that are dark specifically, and the storm maybe counts as like darkness, so Mirage doesn't get that insane buff that she has, right? So I don't know. There's a lot of things to take into consideration whenever it comes to playing buffing frames. So yeah, but anyway, guys, once we get back to the ship, that is pretty much gonna be it for me. There's also other things that you can do. Like I said, arcanes, arcane momentum to help you build combo. If you're using secondaries, arcane velocity. Don't unequip Hornet Strike from your secondaries. It's just that people would use prime cryo rounds and radiation versus the likes of Eidolons. So if you're modding to kill specific enemies, it's totally fine to remove Serration or to remove Hornet Strike or whatever, depending on the weapon. But in most cases, 9 times out of 10, it's not worth, removing Hornet Strike from your build just because you're a fan of Chroma, right? So don't go remove Hornet Strike or Serration or Pressure Point from all of your builds just because you see me do it in a video, because it's very specific usage case. So yeah, that is about it for how to play Chroma. If you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead, hit that like button below. If you want to see more Warframe content from me, hit subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.